All right, so we'll call to order the June 17th, 2024 RAB meeting, and I'll turn it over to Joanna to talk about the virtual rules.
Right, that sounds great. Let me just make sure, let me give one moment to make everybody a co-host if that works. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay in getting folks in there, and I just want to make sure everybody has functionality. All right. I think we're one step closer. Thanks for waiting. So hello, my name is Joanna Bloom, and I'm serving as the technical host for this meeting. We'll start with sharing a few slides of the virtual meeting rules that we follow. These rules are in place to find a balance between transparency with community members and security that minimizes disruptions. We do need a full name associated with each person's participation in open or public comment, and we cannot unmute you without it. If your full name is not currently displayed, please change it, or you can send me a text and I'm happy to change it for you. There is no chat feature for this meeting. The Q&A function is enabled and can be used to address Zoom connectivity questions only. And again, my phone number for a text is 303-817-1742. Members of the public may be unable to control the audio or video features. Video is limited to city officials, employees, and invited speakers only. I will unmute you when you are recognized. And I'll call your name when it's your turn to speak and announce the name of the next speaker on deck. After I've unmuted you, please say your first and last name, and a 3-minute timer will be displayed, and we'll start once you begin your comments. Thank you for your participation. Back to you.
Thanks, Joanna. We'll move to approval of the May meeting minutes. And folks had a chance to read it. Hopefully they did. Fix it again. Cool. Any comments or edits on the May meeting minutes?
No.
Is there a motion to approve the May meeting minutes?
Motion to approve the May minutes. Second.
All those in favor? All right. May meetings are approved. And we'll move to public comment. Do we have anyone waiting to speak?
I do not see anybody, but let me just double check the list. There are no community members wishing to speak tonight.
Okay. Then we can move to our information item. And I don't know, Joe, if you're going to kick it off or, all right, let's do that.
Good evening, board members. I'm Joe Taniucci. I'm the Director of Utilities for the City of Boulder. And tonight we have the second of 3 meetings that we do in May, June, and July on the capital improvement program. And as we normally do in June, we clear the whole agenda so that we can do a deeper dive into that item. And our presentation tonight, I would say, has 2 areas of emphasis. The first one, pretty routine, go through the 2025 capital improvement program, kind of showing you the next 6-year window, as well as proposed rates. The next step would be to bring that back in July for board action. And then, as I mentioned last month, part of that presentation, and we have it embedded within, is a long-term view at the stormwater and flood capital improvement program, much beyond 6 years. And so that'll give the board and the public who might be here to see what's coming down the road and the scale and costs of all of the major flood projects that are in our backlog. And so as I said, it's a deep dive that we do here in June, hoping to get your board feedback and spend some time on the subject tonight. And then our hope would be to bring back probably a fairly brief presentation in July. Hoping to have addressed any feedback that you have and asking for a council recommendation. As always, especially, I always feel bad for the newest board member because there is so much that comes up right away on the CIP, but really for all of you, especially here between June and July, we need to respect the open meetings rules. But if any of you want to reach out to staff one-on-one, and if you have any questions that you don't think of tonight, we're happy to follow up with you. Just like May, leading our presentation tonight will be Chris Douglas. He manages our utilities engineering work group and has been hard at work with his team for several months here getting ready for the CIP, as well as Steph Klingeman, who is our principal financial analyst. And I think just before I turn it over to Chris and Steph, I thought the way we did it in May, where we kind of went through section by section and stopped and asked you for questions kind of as we went, worked fairly well. And so if it works for the board, I think that's what we planned tonight. And the focus will be on there's a little bit of background on the condition indices and things like that of the infrastructure, but we'll be focusing on projects and the rates and the financials. And not to steal the team's thunder, but talking about rates, based on what we projected last year that we thought we would be bringing forward in 2025, you may have noticed in your packet, and we'll be talking about it tonight, that they're actually a little bit lower than what we were projecting last year. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Douglas.
Good evening, board. As Joe mentioned, I'm Chris Douglas, the Utilities Engineering Manager, and talking about the presentation this evening. Certainly, this being the second of 3 meetings, and then I'll be talking about some of the project information, and then handing it over to Steph Klingeman to talk about some of the financials. And really kind of looking at the agenda tonight is a little bit of that capital improvement program overview, key projects, financial information, and then discussion points. But as Joe mentioned, feel free to step up and ask questions whenever you'd like to. But we have worked in some pauses on kind of I'll call it section breaks within the presentation. So now for the capital improvement program overview. As we've talked about in the past, really on the capital improvement program, utilities owns a lot of assets. And complex systems. There's a backlog of rehabilitation work, and that reinvestment is critical in those infrastructure needs. But then also within that critical nature is staff is making a recommendation on a proactive approach on that funding those projects to minimize any significant rate spikes as we go through the program. This first section, I really wanted to just touch base on the asset inventory and management system that the water utility uses. So each of the individual utilities, and think about the thousands of pipelines, pumps, and the entire system has a utility index score. And that is combined into an overall utility index score as shown kind of in that table in the bottom. And what do we do with that score is it's more, or it's less about the actual utility index number and more about the trend of the numbers. So thinking about, we don't want a score of 100. It's not really practical to have everything brand new all the time, but we also, on the other end of the spectrum, don't want a score of 0 in those categories either. So what we're trying to do right now is stop the decline of the numbers and flatten out that trend. And then in the long term, as kind of graph represents, we want to see an increase in that trend. So for instance, as we looked at the utility index score from last year or 2022 versus 2023, in the water system, we went from 45 to 43. And in the source water system, we declined from 54 to 52. So what we've actually done is helped reduce the decline of those numbers. One of the projects we'll talk about tonight is the 63rd Water Treatment Plant, electrical and pumping system improvements. And that actually has been a big increase in the numbers. So therefore that treated water trend is actually is not as much of a decline as we would have had without that project. On the wastewater side of things, we don't have a utility index, or excuse me, an asset maintenance and analysis program at this point. We're planning to complete that work in the coming years, and to prepare for that, we're doing things like improving our data quality in our sewer model, correlating some more GIS information from that program, and also creating an asset inventory at the water resource recovery facility. But we're also doing things like continuing the sanitary sewer lining program, which is represented by the map on the right. And you can see on that map where we have the green pipes are either the pipes that have been lined or don't need to be lined. And then the red and the pink are those pipelines that need to be maintained in the coming years. But the bigger thing we've also done with this is we've also looked at it in the context of the racial equity analysis that the city has been going forward. So the map behind all of the pipes is that that equity index scoring. So where the areas in darker blue are the lower priority of economic stress and need, and where the lighter blue is our higher relative on racial equity and diversity and or economic stress. So what we're looking at from the sewer lining program is addressing those areas that remain that are in those lighter blue areas. And that's kind of that pink overlay that is overlaying some of those lighter blue areas. That's the type of analysis we're looking at as to which areas we want to address, not only from the system need, but also from that racial equity and analysis need. And so now I kind of talked about the water and the wastewater system. And before I go into the things that we're doing within the storm and flood utility, maybe wanted to pause and see if the board had any questions about some of these overview points.
Sorry, what is undefined lining, the yellow?
The undefined lining that's a lot of our larger diameter pipes. And so we're still in that process of, is that something that we want to line, or is it a removal and replacement project? For instance, you can see kind of in the upper middle portion of the graph, there's the yellow line that goes out towards the wastewater treatment plant. And that's actually a section we're working on replacing as a part of the main sewer interceptor project. So it's that we know we need to do work in there, but it's more likely something different than just the traditional lining program. Okay. Now I want to talk about the storm and flood utility, because the storm and flood utility doesn't have an asset and inventory maintenance program, because the primary goal is not replacing of existing facilities, but it's construction of new facilities that were identified in the 2022 comprehensive storm and flood master plan. And what we've done is some analysis on that end, and then turn that into this longer term 35-year capital improvement plan. So I don't know if the board remembers, but we did take a look at a version of this graph back about a year ago. And so on the left is 36 projects that we identified from the comprehensive storm and flood master plan, just arranged geographically. And then on the right, what we've done is we've taken 30 of the 30 projects that are in that longer term range that are starting at 2030. And we prioritize those projects based on the analysis method that we came up with in the storm and flood master plan. So there's 6 projects in there that aren't on that list. And those are actually ones that we are pursuing as a part of the current 2024 to 2029 capital improvement program. So that's where there's a disconnect between what came out in the comprehensive storm flood master plan and where we are today. But we've divided them up by colors really into blocks of 10 to help you understand when we look at the next slide, because we've taken those individual 30 project reaches and lumped them into construction projects. So really wanted to shift onto that, and let the mapping come up. Is you can see on the right is we've taken those 30 projects and divided them up into 14 construction projects. And really where that comes from is the intent of those construction projects is we group them into groups of approximately $15 million each. And with the intent of trying to complete one project approximately every 3 years. And that allows us to get to that 35-year vision funding as directed by City Council. But you'll also notice from the color coding in particular, I would call your attention to that project 2, is we're trying to advance those green colored projects, but it also makes sense because in that particular case in construction grouping 2, we have 2 projects that are a little bit lower on the priority list, but we also want to construct in that same region. So since we're building downstream and then the further upstream is, let's go ahead and do those projects in the middle because it makes sense from a construction standpoint and also from community impact that we can get in and work in that region in one spot and then be out of that particular construction window. So this is the concept that we use to create that longer term CIP process that was in the, I believe it's Schedule 7 of your attachments. And so quick overview on what we're doing and how we've come up with those projects, but again, wanted to pause to see if there were any questions related to how we're looking at our long-term capital planning in the storm flood utility.
What was the basic process that you went through to set the priorities in the course of the chronology of that time period?
In the course of in the concept of choosing the priorities of the specific projects or the individual regions,
Yeah.
Into the groupings, it was the driver was trying to do the highest priorities projects first. And then generally speaking, we want to work from downstream to upstream to where we can then take advantage of the improvements as we continue to work projects.
But in terms of establishing that priority, what were the key variables that you kind of look at in terms of saying this project is probably going to be more critical from an overall city perspective than this project?
And that was based on in the comprehensive storm and flood master plan, where we went through a weighting process that included back a slide with that, because my notes is, if you remember, we evaluated on kind of in order of priority. It was a life safety component for an individual reach, its effectiveness on how we advance a project, equity, environmental culture, and cultural resources cost, and the ability to implement, and multiple benefits. So each one of those categories had a weighting, and then we went through the process of reviewing each individual of these construction reaches with each of those, and then went through a weighting calculation. So that's how we ended up with this list. And then we took, and then again, taking that list and trying to do really the green or the lower ranked, the higher ranked priority projects first, but then turning them into construction projects. Is that helpful on that one, Steve?
On the next slide, the first 15 of those are with Schedule 7, is that correct?
I'm sorry, the first 15 are.
Schedule 7 in the attachments of the minutes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so yes, these are the ones that are in Schedule 7.
Okay.
And you might see in the Schedule 7 in the memo, there may be a disconnect between some of these prices versus what we're showing in the schedule. The other thing that once we rank these projects, we are adding an inflation factor, since we are talking about such a long construction period, to where the planned construction dollars are more just because of that time delay. And then now I'd like to move on to some of those key projects that Joe mentioned. So first wanted to start out, and this is the general structure here is we're dividing it up really by utility, and we'll have a kind of a pause after we talk about each of the utility sections. So the first group is the source water utility. And we have some ongoing projects on the Albion Dam and the Barker Gravity Pipeline that we've spent last several years talking to the board with, and those projects are progressing and working through things. And one of the things just pointing out is we are working with the design team and the consultant team and looking at doing an additional raise on the Albion Dam project. So we're still in that design component, which may add another construction season. And then on the Barker Gravity Pipeline, that's the one where we're doing small sections of line every year. And it's been working since 2017 and projected to be completed in 2029. And I just wanted to show the picture on the right shows the tight corridor that we're working in. And we can kind of see the bench on this picture, and that's where the pipeline's going. So this lining program really makes sense from minimizing our impacts. And the other big thing that we talked a little bit about in May is we're looking at projects in the outer years of the CIP based on the 2020 Colorado Dam regulation safety changes. And so with that was some changes that the state of Colorado came up with. So we're evaluating our dams related to hydraulic hazard of the dam, seismic design requirements, and the hydrologic model requirements. So it's a different change in how the regulatory agency is wanting to look at additional data. So we're taking that and looking at that right now. And that's then the opportunity for us to help us reprioritize, particularly what are three big projects that we've got in the CIP related to the Barker Outlet, some Barker Dam, and then the Silver Lake Outlet spillway. And so what you'll notice in the CIP documents is we have in 2028 a Barker Outlet Works project. But as Joe talks about moving the mixing board on projects, we may see some projects shifting around a little bit based on that dam safety analysis. And then moving on to the water treatment facility. So the first one here is represented by the 63rd project and 63rd water treatment plants located on the east side of town near Boulder Reservoir. So the recent project represented by the two upper pictures, we replaced most of the major pumps in the facility, electrical equipment, and some of the larger diameter pipe. The electrical and pumping changes in the facility increased our operating range for the pumps so that we can be more efficient with our water rates portfolio. So thinking about how we control the pumps is something similar to when you put a dim, right now, previously the pumps were when you turn your lights on, you flip a switch. But if you put a dimmer on your light switch, you can control that, the amount of light depending on the situation you've got. Well, with this new pumping system, we can do that with our pumping capabilities to really hit that sweet spot in our water rights portfolio. And then the Patasso project, and again, the Patasso water treatment plant is located about 3 miles west of town of Boulder Canyon. And so we're in the process of a multi-year, multi-phased project. So right now we're kicking off phase one where we're doing some rehabilitation to a backwash tank, which will happen this fall. And then the next phase is we're looking at upgrades to the corrosion control system. And what that will allow us to do is help control the corrosion really in the 400-mile distribution system that we have within the city. And really that's going to help with our Boulder's water quality and our high water quality standard. And then finally, the third phase is we're replacing the tank that's shown in that picture on the bottom with a chlorine contact basin, which is going to allow us to improve our efficiency in our disinfection system. And then moving on from the treatment plants, we have the transmission system, which is the backbone of the water delivery system, and which we deliver the waters to the smaller pipes eventually to the customers. There's many miles of transition pipes slated for replacement in the coming years. The first of these projects is the start of a multi-phase project along the 63rd Street corridor, which is that pipeline in the dark blue. And this project will replace the aging pipe and upsize it to increase capacity that is delivered to the system. And this, and then we're looking at the second phase in the orange there, which will follow up in 2026 following that first phase. And then we also in the later years of the CIP have more transmission pipelines represented by the pink lines. And then the treatment plant, or excuse me, storage tank system is the buffer between the treatment plant and the transmission system. So these tanks manage the changes in our water demand over the course of the day. And these tank projects will occur later years in the CIP. One, we need to complete the wastewater treatment facility work, but then also these are longer lead time and we're requiring a lot more of interdepartmental and customer and community coordination. So we're looking at beginning preliminary design work on the tank from Chautauqua in the Chautauqua area in 2025, and then looking at adding a new storage tank in the East Boulder area, and that preliminary work starting in 2026. And that's the update on projects in the water treatment system. So certainly want to pause, see if the board has any questions related to the water system projects.
In the May meeting, you have the green, yellow, red diagram. That was very helpful. Can you speak to kind of the status of 63rd and Batasso after these projects? Will we be more green and yellow?
We'll definitely in the 63rd and Batasso is definitely more on that green end. And if you remember, when we talked in May, that was, for instance, or even the concept of the utility condition index score. So the 63rd treatment plant right now, last year was at that 53 score. And typically there's always a decline every year just because of the aging of things. Well, because of upgrading the pumping and the piping systems, we actually increase that score up to a 59. So that's adding that into that green zone. And that's really what we're anticipating by hitting those specific assets, as we're definitely going from that red that is that lower UCI score to bringing it up to close to 100% where it's new, those sections are new and completed.
On the Albion project, I think the note said that you had decided to raise that a little bit further because of some additional water rights or something?
And yes, and what we're looking at on that the Albion Dam is if we've done the analysis, we have more storage rights than in that Albion Dam than we've been historically taking advantage of. And that was really a combination of some things we found during the construction project. So that's where we're looking at that raise, because from that, can we take advantage of our water rights?
Why? I didn't quite understand why that wasn't, the availability of those rights weren't known at the originally, or what changed in the middle of the project, I guess.
And really what changed in the middle of the project is we did a survey of the storage volume once the reservoir had been drained.
Oh, okay.
And we really realized we didn't have the storage volume that we thought, frankly, was from the old timers when they put the reservoir in it. Initially, there was a disconnect between that survey information.
How big a difference was it?
It's approximately about 300 acre feet. And so and then in that context of, very generally speaking, industry-wide, not necessarily Boulder-wide, but that's about 600, the amount of water that 600 homes use in a given year.
That's a fairly significant percentage of what you thought the capacity was, right?
It certainly is. And that's where, as we gain new information, it certainly is those aspects of, okay, does it make sense? And it was particularly, does it make sense because we're here and working with the contractor to take advantage of that. Okay, now onto the wastewater system. So a few slides on the wastewater system, updating the main sewer interceptor phase 2 project. And really, this is the sewer line that's carrying about 85% of the city's wastewater. And so this particular project, what we're doing is we're actually installing a new piping there in blue, where in the previous maps with the sewer line, John, that you were talking about, that was kind of that yellow and green area. And what that project allows us to do is move the water out of the Boulder Creek corridor, which is something we've been looking at for a while that was really exacerbated during the 2013 floods. But we're actively under construction there, and we've replaced about 1.5 miles of that 2.5 mile pipeline. And so most of that is the traditional excavation and installation, which is the light blue. But then in the darker blue, in the lower left of the map, is we're doing a little over 2,000 feet of a tunneling project. And that's represented by the picture on the right, to where in the Valmont and Butte Mill area, you can kind of see the blue lines. We're doing 2 separate tunnels that are going underneath the Valmont Road alignment. And that was part of coordinating with Boulder County on keeping the Valmont Road corridor open during construction. And so we're finishing up, and really here by the end of the month, we will finish the first tunnel, which is the tunnel leg that's kind of there in the foreground in that picture. And then we're looking at in 2029 in the CIP, the yellow areas is a phase 3 project. And that's a particular one where we're looking to actually do some lining on that pipeline instead of a replacement project. Then at the Water Resource Recovery Facility, we have 2 things I wanted to point out for the board is, one, we're continuing with the phosphorus project, which is regulatory driven to meet incentives for implementation of Regulation 85, which is a nutrient removal regulation to improve our water quality as it's discharged back into Boulder Creek. And that construction's underway, and it's really represented. They're touching several spots within the Water Resource Recovery Facility in yellow. And then in green are over the course of the 6-year CIP is we're rehabilitating existing clarifier basins. So that's something that you'll see in the CIP is clarifier rehabilitation. And then those are just 2 updates on the wastewater system. So again, wanted to pause and see if the board had any questions on that.
I have a question more broadly for the
Yep.
CIP. How much flexibility does CIP have for economies of scale, or when you're in a project and you realize, oh, this quick fix, if we do it now while everything's already under construction, we can get it done, even though it's later in the list of priorities. Just like once you lock these in and you've done it very systematically, but how much wiggle room is there in the CIP to say, well, in actuality, we could save a lot of time and effort if we do it now?
I think my supervisors are your biggest fan, because that is something that we talk about all the time on that. Oh, okay, can we move forward with something? Can we not move forward with something? And actually, one of the examples is one of the clarifier projects that we're working on right now. There was an economy of scale, and we got pricing to do 2 clarifiers versus the 1 clarifier that we were planned. So we're actively looking at, there is a give and take, and can we go ahead and take advantage of doing these 2 clarifier projects, but realizing what is that trade-off on the other end, or particularly then there's also that interaction that we have with this board on the, okay, if we shift like that, how do we make sure we're bringing you along in that shifting conversation?
My question, like how, for the process-oriented aspect of this, how much does it add in, you know, oh, well, this wasn't in the CIP defined this way, and that's actually later, you know, 5 years later, we're going to address this. Like, do you have enough flexibility to be able to say, you know, logically, things have changed, or we're in here now, and this could be a quick fix now, which is going to 5 years later be tearing this back up to do this fix?
And I think the flexibility really exists, but it is a concept of bringing RAB along with us at City Council with those kind of changes. And some of it depends on, you know, when is that change going to happen? Is it in already pre-approved budget year, or maybe it's in a 2025 change that we're actively working. So I do believe that flexibility exists, and it's more about that communication on how we're shifting.
Chris, if I might.
Yes.
I think Steph will cover the financial picture a little bit like Chris is doing with the projects tonight, and it will actually go through the finances of the wastewater fund. And she will talk about reserves and things like that. And we manage our project infrastructure and our financial portfolio such that we do have some flexibility because things do change. And they're like the main sewer project, for example, and the tunneling that we're doing. Tunneling often presents a lot of risk in construction and things that are unforeseen conditions underground. And so we have to be ready for that. We've got the ability within the 6-year CIP, say, to move things around, and it's not an exact science to a project going this year versus that year. So using our reserves, moving things around, we try to create enough flexibility for ourselves. Because those things are just a reality.
Or even, and maybe an example on that, where it went the other direction was on the main sewer project. We were planning on, we wanted to do phase 2 and phase 3 at the same time. But because of some of the recent cost escalations that we've had over the years, it was really, we needed to do the tunneling, the trenching project that was more expensive. So we've shifted that lining program, or that phase 3 out to future use. Yeah.
I got a, I guess, a similar sort of general overview question that I thought about when I was looking through all the numbers is, how do you guys do like more of a sensitivity analysis on these projects, like we think about from a private investment perspective, and in terms of a given project, looking at, for example, I don't know, could buy this pump, it would last 20 years, and then this other pump is cheaper, but it may only last 15 years, or we could do this part of the project this year, but it might be more expensive next year. I mean, how much of that kind of sensitivity do you do before you kind of get to the base case that you're showing us?
Yeah, I mean, Chris or Chris could answer that really well, but since you're looking at me, often these projects have an alternatives analysis as when we start with a conceptual design, and there are many design phases, we would look at alternatives. There may be large scale, very different options of a way to approach something and cost implications. Again, pointing to the main sewer project, we could have done an open trench, like closed down Belmont Road for half a year or a year or whatever, done an open trench and installed the pipe that way. And so almost every project that we do, there's quite a bit of variability in terms of the ways that we could do it. And so we look at those things and the pros and cons and the trade-offs, and work with our consultants who are always helping us on these large scale things to dial in on a recommended alternative.
Okay, now I wanted to shift to the storm and flood utility. So we'll talk about some of those projects. And the first project I really wanted to touch base on was the South Boulder Creek project. So from a flood perspective, it's a pretty straightforward project. There's lots, it gets complicated quickly, but generally speaking, it includes an earthen dam, which you can kind of see in that, what I'll call brownish orange. And then there's a concrete spillway wall for overflow, which is running parallel to US 36. And then we have an outlet works, which is kind of the yellow line there that conveys the water from the flood storage to eventually back to South Boulder Creek. And so recently we've been through with City Council a process of disposing some of the project area that was under Open Space and Mountain Parks control, and also gone through an annexation project for portions of the project. But we're currently working with the consulting team on the 90% design and obtaining permits and getting this project ready to bid. What I wanted to show on this next slide is a video that we have created of what the project will look like from when flooding does happen. So here we're sitting at South Boulder Creek and US 36 kind of on the east side of the project. And as we go through this, we can see where the flooding will occur, and then along 36, there's that flood spillway wall. And then it ends up with the outlet works that eventually go back to South Boulder Creek. And then you can see the dam in the background, and now we'll pivot over to the Table Mesa and US 36 area and look at the project kind of looking back towards the south. And with the green is that embankment, earthen embankment dam.
Chris, if I might add to that, just quickly, sorry to interrupt you in flow, but that's what it'll look like when there's a storm and a flood. It'll be holding back water, but it'll generally be dry. And the outlet works that Chris talked about will drain all of that water eventually, and it'll stay dry.
That goes under the road somewhere right after the exit or the entry ramp there.
Yes.
Yep.
So it's, if you see the trees on the left there, that outlet works is really right there over there on the trees.
And the $63 million bond I think in the memo, it says that's for next year, and this table is for 2024.
And we did in 2024, if you remember when we talked to Rob last year, it was looking at that construction time. And we did talk about bonding. We were thinking we were going to be bonding in late 2024. Going to construction. We are now looking at construction in 2025. So we're trying to time the bonding appropriately. So it really is, as we look at the bonding market and looking forward on that end, just this, if we want to bond in conjunction.
Work on those bonds. It's a big body of work and stuff. So
yeah, I'll also just quickly mention, if you look at the fund financials, we actually don't have the principal and interest for that bond hitting until 2025. So just to keep that in your head.
Last time, at our last RAD meeting, you brought up the trumpet diagram, the contingency and the timing. And so that sort of speaks to this question of how are you planning around some of the uncertainty? And when you're looking out at these projects that are going to be constructed in 2028, 2029, you obviously have a lot more contingency baked into those project numbers, as well as escalation to mid time of construction. So you're, I think, basing those calculations on the combination of those. You're also fitting that into the picture when you're thinking about how much is this going to cost us at the end of the day.
Yes. So yeah, and from that trumpet diagram and that funnel is in these early completion projects, we do have that large buffer, but then we're taking that information and then escalating it depending on when we're planning on doing that particular.
Which is why
project.
you don't want to bond until you're about to construct.
Correct.
you know, like for the South Boulder Creek project, we're starting to really dial in on the level of precision of the cost estimate. And back to Lauren's question, for any of these, when they get that close, we've got a lot of time and energy invested in them. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to try and get as close as we can on the cost estimates, but sometimes it can be difficult, especially in the current market. So having that flexibility to adapt, like Chris said, we did with the main sewer project, where, okay, we're going to have to separate these two parts of the project into separate phases, but there's still the majority of it that we can go forward with. Like that's the juggling act that we have to do sometimes.
So the next project I wanted to talk about is the Gregory Canyon Creek flood project. And we haven't talked a lot to the board about this as some of the other projects we've done in future years. So wanted to spend just a little more time getting you up to speed on where we are. So in the Gregory Canyon Creek enters the city limits near Chautauqua Park and drains and travels to the confluence with Boulder Creek near the intersection of 9th and Arapahoe. So through the I'll call it the western part of the hill area. And that's a highly developed area, and we have a steep drainage. So we have a very narrow channel in that particular area. And so as you can see on the map in the blue is the limits that we surveyed during the 2013 flood. And we estimated that at a 40 to a 50-year storm event. But the other part was with that channel that's there is we have several very narrow road crossings. So a lot of those culverts became blocked. And so we did have that extensive stream flooding. And really just these photos show some of the damage that happened during the 2013 flood. And then to mitigate that plan is council approved a mitigation plan in 2015. We began preliminary design in 2021. And with that narrow channel, as you can kind of see, this is the vision of the channel that we're talking about installing, which is in this very tight corridor. So there's not the, we're looking at designing for about a 25-year storm to be able to handle that flow. And it's a combination. We've divided the project into 2 phases. On the map is phase 1, which really goes from Pennsylvania Avenue on the lower right to the intersection of 9th and Arapahoe on the upper left. And that's a combination of channel improvements and then also improving and the roadway crossings. Then the second phase, which is in later years of the CIP, is really from Chautauqua Park to Pennsylvania Avenue. And that's primarily road widening and culvert project. So we're currently in the midst of the detailed design of that project, which also includes an easement acquisition process, which we're looking to begin to start coordinating with the impacted homeowners where this creek travels through later this summer.
Ask a couple questions. Yes. I was just curious about the council approved a plan in 2015, then design started in 2021. Just curious about why the
history of that gap is primarily there were some staffing changes issues and really a big impact was COVID. So but then that is also some of that gap time is sometimes we do have gaps between that mitigation plan and that approval of conceptual to where we're going to where we're diving into the detailed design.
And then I saw City Council on Thursdays discussing the property easement acquisition, and I was just curious if you could talk about that and what impacts that might have on the project.
Yeah. I was thinking about mentioning that under matters as well, but we can cover it here. So anytime we have one of these projects in utilities, a flood project where we need easements, there are certain procedures that go with those, and with transportation projects as one, there can be circumstances where we might have to condemn a property, maybe something to do with the ownership or something like that. We really try to negotiate with the property owners and have been successful in avoiding those types of actions. But it's been the city's practice to go to council before we start into those processes to ask them for that authority. In the unlikely event it's needed, they've taken that action in advance. So that's what that is.
So in theory, they could say, no, you don't have that authority, or?
They haven't in the history of city projects, but and really the state gives the city as an entity that authority. It's more of a policy thing for council to say that they're comfortable with that being in the mix. While we're talking about the Gregory Creek project, and maybe I'll just skip what I was going to say under matters. We had and hit it now. We had a community meeting on May 30th that I think I mentioned under matters last month. And some of our newer team members, we talked about the transition, led the presentation, did a really nice job, got a nice reception from the public and some quite a few questions that we went through and question and answer, and felt like it was a successful community meeting. And sometimes, we have these slides and we have facts and figures and numbers, and just to put it into perspective, if anyone's been along Boulder Creek here in the last few weeks, we're in the peak runoff season, and the flows have gotten up to, I was just looking today, I think it was 680 cubic feet per second, which if you and a cubic foot per second is like a basketball going by. It's 1 cubic foot per second. So imagine 680 basketballs every second. And that is if you've seen it in the last few weeks, it's dropped, but it's a lot of water. And that's Boulder Creek. That's a large established drainage with a lot of watershed area. Gregory Creek is a much smaller creek. And that is in the order of magnitude of flow that we're designing for this thing. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think its current capacity is around 150. So everything during the 2013 flood, anything in excess of that ends up on the streets and in people's houses. So that is a significant improvement to make on a relatively small channel.
Really a question from my kids. We were biking by Boulder Creek and it looks super dangerous and scary and about to come over. What control does the water utilities have over the speed of the flow and ability to control it?
It's a great question. So if people have been up to Netherland, but 20 miles up Boulder Canyon, we have Barker Reservoir. And so it's Middle Boulder Creek that is the drainage that starts up there in Netherland. And every year we draw down that reservoir in the wintertime when there's not a lot of precipitation or what there is snow. We're drawing down our reservoirs and they get lower and lower. And then in the spring, the snow melts and the runoff starts and it fills back up. When it gets to a point of hitting the spillway, water will start to spill over. And so we can control it with valves and things like that until that point. But once it hits the spillway, whatever's coming in goes over. We still use the valves and have control, but the scale changes really quickly from the amount of control we have over what's in the creek. And unfortunate tragedy last year with some deaths in the creek, and it is a topic of discussion. It's been there with city council, multiple departments involved, fire department, police, our department, parks and recreation, because a lot of the city is a park, and just thinking about how to communicate with the public about the risks and but also how to give people access, people that are skilled whitewater rafters like that. This is the time of year, but making sure that we're carefully messaging all of that.
Have your water quality folks ever tried to calculate how much we might be losing? Like if there was a reservoir somewhere over here at the bottom of the canyon that we could capture some of that? I mean, how much are we losing on an annual basis if we got to a point in the future where we're starting to get tight on the rates?
We know what the volume of water is that's in Boulder Creek and what we're taking and what goes downstream. I don't remember what the scale of those numbers off the top of my head, but we're also constantly perfecting our water rights portfolio and have applications in progress, including some to capture water much further downstream and be able to use it in different ways. So we do pay attention to them.
How many properties are in the area?
Do not have that number off the top. You've got that one, Joe?
I believe it's 20 or 22 in this phase that are going to need easements.
Okay, so there's some that the priority would be to actually to acquire the properties and purchase them, right? If there's a willing seller.
And we do have a property pre-acquisition, flood pre-acquisition program. And actually you can see the 3 yellow dots that are on this map. Those were properties that the city did acquire from willing sellers. So, and that was something that we're looking to incorporate and consulting with the community on how we can integrate those into the project. But then in this particular, on the easement acquisition, we're not looking at acquiring someone's property. We're looking at acquiring the use of a portion of someone's property to be able to put in the flood channel. So a little bit different look. because just on where the alignment of the channels. So but that is another program that you'll see in there that, you know, we're generally speaking from a flood acquisition program acquiring right now about one property a year from willing property sellers.
22 is the number.
22 is the number. Good. Thank you. So another project I wanted to touch base on is the Upper Goose Creek Flood and Stormwater Project. So this is a combination of storm flood channel improvements, but also addressing the stormwater or the stormwater pipes that we use to collect this for the smaller storms and collecting that flow. And really from two components here is we have the channel work, and then also it's that storm pipe work. And so I think we even looked at this last year, but this is the picture from the 2013 flooding in the North Boulder Park area. So this project is helping us put in the right size pipes in that area to help the drainage in this part of the city. So, but what we need to do is be able to convey that water downstream. So we need the flood project, which is further to the east than this North Boulder Park area.
So does this include the 100-year mitigation through the old hospital site right here?
And there's actually another there's another project. So two of the projects we talked about, and when we did the reach analysis that we are included in the 2024 to 2029 project is really there's the channel through the old hospital project, which is really kind of running diagonally to your upper left along the screen. And then there's an inlet structure on the water that will be coming into North Boulder Park to get into that channel. So these are a couple of situations of some projects that we're advancing a little bit earlier because it's in conjunction with other work. So related to the Upper Goose Creek project, but not, it's not directly a part of the utilities planned project. And then the last thing I really wanted to touch base on was this is a list of several of the interdepartmental projects that we're working on. Really not going to go through the list, but I just wanted to touch base on one project represented by the picture there is the 19th Street at 4 Mile Canyon Creek project that's currently underway. So it does flood mitigation, but it's also includes improvement of travel on 19th Street, and which is an important multimodal connection in North Boulder. And so it includes a new bicycle and pedestrian underpass and replacing and widening the 19th Street Bridge, which will include new sidewalks and bike lanes. So it's a combination. There's this definitely close working order that we've had with the transportation department on really serving both department needs. And that is my last slide on projects. So certainly open up for any other maybe questions if we want to right now before I hand it over to Steph to talk about financial matters.
I would just say, Chris, and for the board, I know that's a lot. And we had the May presentation where Chris walked through all the different systems that are part of each utility. And so we're really looking at the condition of things and prioritizing and putting the most urgent needs first. And I always think it's like a giant musical mixing board and just looking at all the factors and how we bring these forward. There's several $1 billion worth of infrastructure, as we've previously discussed, that we're responsible for. And so trying to reinvest in that in a way that's manageable for us to do the projects and manageable for the community in terms of rates. But I realize it's a lot for the board to take in as well.
I have one question. Maybe this will get to your presentation set, but in the memo, there's an anticipated revenue bond section for the 2025, 2030 CFP, and it just has 3 bonds for water and wastewater and then one for South Boulder Creek. but then there's more bonds in the tables. I was just curious, am I reading that correctly, or is this like a misread that I'm?
No, that's a good catch. I think you're talking about maybe the Spring Valley annexation.
That's one of them for water and wastewater.
Yeah.
And there's a $79 million bond for Barker, Arapahoe Trunk, sewer replacement, and the wharf temperature, and then the South Boulder Creek. But there's more bonds in the 2025-2030 CIP. So I was just confused why those were highlighted.
And I think we highlighted the three bonds that were the most recent bonds that we completed or were planning on doing here in, I'll call it the near term. And then we are looking at also a future bonding we're planning on doing down the road. So it was almost, we spent a little bit of time talking about the most recent bonds and particularly South Boulder Creek, because we're right on the verge of doing that one. And was almost is it a 2024 or is it a 2025 bond?
Mhm.
But then the other bonds are a little bit further out of the CIP.
I think that's right. And if we wanted to go to the schedules before I jumped in and just quickly walk through them. I think the 28-29 bond. So right now we've got a 28 bond for the water and then a 29 bond for the wastewater. That's just with the project's timing right now. That's envisioned really to be one bond, probably happening in 2028 or 2029. We're just a little far out right now to kind of anticipate when we would be for sure bonding, but it'll be either 28 or 29 for those two. And then I think we have another one in the storm flood. We do not. But there is a question in 2028 of whether or not we would bond or pay cash for those projects.
And if I could pick up on that, that was part of the analysis that staff and other staff in Chris's area and consultants looked at for that long-term CIP for the storm and flood. We will sometimes hear concerns from community members about the projects that we're currently working on, and the price tags seem high. And will we be able to afford projects in other areas of town? And so that's part of the reason we did that exercise, to look at what are the magnitude of the projects, what would rates look like to do these over a series of years and really decades, and would we have to bond? How much would we have to bond? So that was a big part of that analysis. And the good news is from what we're looking at, it seems like we can do it with reasonable rate increases, and we can manage, and we have the ability to bond if we need to, but we're not showing a lot of that need just yet.
Thanks. Again, I'm Steph Klingeman. I'm going to present a handful of slides on financial matters, starting with our current utilities funding sources. So the first three items here on this slide are funding options that we've pursued in the past, starting with our user fees. Our revenues generated from our user fees are our most reliable and largest funding source. We've also leveraged municipal bonding, which we were just talking about. It's a cost-effective way to finance some of our long-term capital projects. And then also listed here is the Colorado State Revolving Fund Program. So we did use this program last year to help fund part of our phosphorus upgrade project at the wastewater treatment facility. The benefit with the SRF program really is that it offers low interest loans, and then we also received an immediate loan forgiveness of $1.5 million. So it's a really, really great tool for us to use for that specific project. These other two funding sources are current options that we're pursuing or considering. So the first is the U.S. Army Corps Match Program, which is actually funded by Congress. There are typically cost sharing requirements between the Corps and the city, and the projects must also meet federal regulatory requirements, which can add complexity and time to project development. We're also considering the federal grant program for hydro upgrade projects. And so I'll just mention quickly, these are options to us, but they are both competitive programs, and both are subject to federal priorities and guidelines. So with the capital plan that you all received, we are looking at an 8% increase in our water rates, 6% increase in our wastewater rates, and a 5% increase in our storm and flood rates for 2025. I'll just mention, last year we did project an 8% increase across all three utilities for 2025. The driver for these lowered rates really relate back to project readiness and then the reprioritization effort that we went through on the CIP this year. And so this is showing the single family residential bill impact, the monthly bill impact between 2024 and projected for 2025. It's about an $8.61 difference. Most of that, I think about 50% of that actually is coming from the water fund increase. So I just wanted to stop, see if there are any questions with the proposed rates that we have here.
Is this averaged across the year, or is it a particular season?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's for a single family home. The assumptions are a 4,000 gallon winter average and a 90,000 consumption over the course of the year. Okay. So the city works in partnership with Boulder County to distribute information around the various Boulder County assistance programs. These are just some that are listed here. So we've got an emergency rental assistance program, mortgage payment assistance program, food pantries and meal program options. Boulder County Health and Human Services also provides counseling and financial education to help residents manage their finances effectively. And then in the wintertime, we also have the Low Income Energy Assistance Program, which provides financial assistance to low income houses between November and April. So I thought it might be helpful, just because this is included in our attachments, just to walk through a fund financial example, just at a really high level. So the calculation's pretty straightforward. Some of the inputs and assumptions that actually goes into projecting revenues is a little bit more complex, but we can just kind of stick with the simplicity of this exercise. So you really start with your beginning fund balance. You add any sources of funds, which are essentially your revenues. Most of our revenues come from service charge fees. Then you subtract out your use of funds, also known as our expenses. So this includes our operating expenses, debt service, transfers, and capital. And then we have a total that is our fund balance before reserves. I'll talk a little bit more about reserves in the next slide, but we do make an adjustment for reserves just so that we, are managing risk and maintaining our financial stability throughout the forecasted year. So I'll just mention really quickly that you'll see that there on that bottom line, we have an ending fund balance as of 2023 of about $40.8 million. We are projected to draw that down mostly this year with some of our expenses at the wastewater treatment facility related to the main sewer interceptor project, and then also the phosphorus upgrade project. So, we do get down to about $4.2 million in 2026, but we feel comfortable with that level, and we'll work on building back up those reserves in our ending fund balance after that time. So reserves, they act as a financial buffer to cover any unexpected expenses. They can also mitigate the impact of revenue fluctuations by smoothing out cash flows, which allows us to have more levelized rate increases year over year. Reserves could also be earmarked for future capital projects. I'm just highlighting a few of our reserves that we have across all three funds here. We have an operating reserve for each utility, which is an unrestricted reserve used to cover routine expenses like salaries, utility maintenance, treatment cost, and other administrative expenses. We also have capital reserves across all three utilities. Within water, we have the Water Resiliency Reserve. Both of these reserves, the intent is they're supposed to be used to respond to natural disasters and other unexpected emergencies. And then within the wastewater and storm and flood funds, we have a restricted bond reserve, which is a bond covenant requirement. And then the last couple slides, they really just cover a couple of examples of financial metrics that are used to assess the financial health of a utility. So the first one is the days cash on hand comparison. It is a financial metric that measures the number of days a utility can cover its operating expenses using its available cash reserve. I would say that this varies by utility, but generally utilities aim to have at least 90 to 120 days cash on hand. I also have in here the S&P strong rating example of 150 days. So you can see that City of Boulder's days cash on hand compares favorably. We do, at a minimum hit the S&P strong rating, but we also exceed it more often than not for each of our 3 funds. And then another useful financial metric is the debt service coverage ratio. So this is a financial metric used to assess the ability of the city to cover its debt obligations. A higher DSC indicates a stronger ability to service debt. Here again, I have the city minimum requirement of 1.25 times compared to a Moody's strong rating of 2 times. And again, the city of Boulder compares favorably to both of those. So I know I ran through some of that kind of quick, but are there any questions either on the rates or fund financials, any of these financial metric comparisons?
Do you have one slide from the storm? Green that represents the stormwater.
Yeah.
And just the explanation for why it's so high in those 3 years.
Yeah, so we've been building up our reserves ahead of the South Boulder Creek project. And so you can actually see that it does, it decreased quite a bit in 2028 when we, after we bonded for South Boulder Creek, and also after we've had some more capital expenses, it does increase back up in 2030. But I will say we have a pretty aggressive capital plan through 2031, 2032 for our storm and flood fund. So it does look relatively high, but we are using reserves as they are available to help pay for some of those capital projects in the storm and flood fund. Yeah.
It's also, Steph, I think some guidance from our central finance department of how we build up for those big projects. And I think we're making a transition of moving when we need to do that, put it in a reserve where we used to show it as a line item in the year for the capital project itself. That's tricky for the finance team because as we're building up, we're not actually spending it, and so this is probably the better way to do it.
From a internal practices or even a legal point of view, how much of those funds viewed as being in separate pots? I mean, if you add into a problem on the wastewater side, would you take some of the cash from? They have to be kind of managed separately, or
Yeah, they're all separate enterprise funds, so they're managed separately.
is that sort of by law for each separate entity?
They are separate entities. I will say when we do go out for bonding, we do package the water and the wastewater together. So this most recent bonding effort that we did in 2024, it was a combined water wastewater bonding effort. Storm and flood is distinct and separate from that.
It has to be legally. The storm and flood has to be separate.
In the event of some kind of unforeseen emergency or something, how long does it take to put together a bond issue? I mean, in an emergency circumstance that you really needed cash to do some whatever emergency project, how fast could that be done?
They don't happen fast, but I think that is our strategy is more with the reserves of having enough to weather that situation. And the disaster reserve is something that we've set up in the last several years, partly from our own experience of seeing what happened during COVID and across the city, the impact sales tax had on many departments. That's not our revenue stream, but in an extended drought, when there's water sales are down or things like that, it was just kind of eye-opening to see what that experience is like. And so creating those reserves, I think, is our first strategy. And
hence why we have more in stormwater, because I guess the emergencies are probably flood. And you're building up your bank, and with your revenues, you're building up the ability to cover that debt service when it comes as well.
Exactly. Yeah, we're keeping a close eye on that, and it's really healthy, and I think it just shows that the utilities and their financial standing. What are the assumptions around proposed rate increases in this? Are there any? What do you mean, like how are we forecasting our rates?
Yeah.
So it really is taking into account the projected capital plan. What do rates need to be in order to meet the needs of the capital plan with, you know, bonding and, you know, considering bonding in there. But there are also, you know, looks at our revenue projections too. And so to Joe's point, you know, we had a really wet spring last year, and so our revenues in our water fund were actually down. And so we have this resilience reserve to kind of help cover it, but you know, there are also other assumptions that kind of are at play when we are projecting our rate increases.
So just along those lines, and I know this isn't a question,
No.
and it's the conversation that you're just having, but like the city's doing so well of kind of industry best practices. Is there any thought of like, could you bring some of this down and reduce the rate increases needed to have, or is, and again, I know that's, the answer is no, but I'm just like thinking out loud here that.
Well, I think that's what we're doing for this year. We have brought the rate increases down. And I'm comfortable with bringing them down for this year because we still anticipate the projects that Chris presented on and, you know, being able to meet those needs. I mean, I will just kind of point out here, like in 2029, the wastewater utility is just kind of right at that S&P strong rating, still above the industry minimum, but we're kind of right at that bar. So wouldn't really want to go much lower than that, especially if we are needing to bond within the wastewater utility, 2029, 2030.
I think it's really important for us to pay attention to those targets and to get the most favorable bond ratings that we can, because we get better rates, and that gives us more flexibility and more buying power with what we're getting to do these projects and operate our system. So it's back to that giant musical mixing board and all the things, all the factors that we're carefully looking at.
Jumping back just a little bit earlier in the conversation, we were talking about the designs and sort of moving into these later stages of designs and the anticipation of the construction. And you brought up the Corps of Engineers program. And I just wonder, you know, with the Corps of Engineers comes the BABA domestic preference and some of these requirements. Are you trying to incorporate those into some of these very large capital projects so that you have the flexibility to capitalize on those funding programs?
Yeah, that's something that 2 roles ago, I have personal experience doing that. And we tend to know that when we're moving through the design work and getting ready for a project, and just the timing of the applications for grants. And so if we know that we're successful or likely to be successful, we will for sure build those things into the construction documents so that the requirements are there for the materials we purchase and the contractors to use all the federal purchasing requirements. I think some of those things are based on really good principles and are kind of baked into our general conditions and allowance anyway, but we will adapt if we know we're going to be successful.
And there are projects where we have more of those requirements. And for instance, we talked about the phosphorus upgrade project where we got some of those SRF loans. Yes, we're working through those issues, but the other side of it is that's more time and effort. But I keep coordinating with staff is, remember, we got $1.5 million in loan forgiveness. So we can do a lot of extra work that won't even get close to that loan forgiveness. So there is that balance, or again, a mixing board on the push-pull on taking advantage of some of those programs.
But it has to be factored in, and it has to be considered, because it has an effect. Some mostly positive, but some of those things result in higher costs too.
You know, that certainly is part of that coordination and how we put that project out to bid and making sure we're accounting for those sorts of things.
Any other questions? Good conversation.
Before that, we had any other, we've really paused or anything for questions. And I did mention earlier, is I also do have the, if we do get into some of the more technical side of things, I do have the utility engineering supervisors in each of the different utilities. They're actually on the line and listening in, just if we get into questions. But I think we've been able to answer most of the questions here this evening between the group that's in the room.
Thank you. That was really great.
Concise
Going through.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe before we turn it over to the other things on the agenda, I just mentioned John, just realizing in the flow of the meeting here that it on our agenda wasn't our intent. I think it was a miss on our part. We showed the public comment happening at 6:20 p.m. and there's kind of a gap that shouldn't have been there. So I'm not sure, John, as chair, if you want to, maybe if there are people following along, if they showed up at 6:20 and expecting to speak, might have wanted to.
Yeah. No, let's definitely do that, and apologize to anyone who showed up at 6:20 hoping to speak and wasn't able to. So Joanna, I don't know if we have anyone ready and interested to speak, but definitely want to provide that space since it seems like that was a mistake on our end.
And just to mention, it would just be open comment. None of what we're discussing tonight is a public hearing, but next month, the capital improvement program will actually have a public hearing, so people could come to speak specifically to that.
So I do see a couple of folks in the attendee box, and I'll just give them a second if they want to virtually raise their hands through Zoom. Through the function, it should be on your screen and you can virtually raise your hand. You can also text me at 303-817-1742. If you are having trouble finding that hand, I'll give it just a minute. I do know Lynn Siegel was here earlier and hoping to comment, but I know she's also juggling meetings, and so I don't see her on line anymore. I did text her to ask her if she still wanted to comment and haven't heard back. So I might just flag for you if she comes back. Otherwise, maybe we'll just give it a quick minute for any other attendees.
I guess maybe just while we're waiting, and I'll echo thank you for that the presentation, and all my questions were answered really well during the presentation. So just want to thank staff for that. Was very helpful and informative. So
great. I don't see anybody with hand raises. I will I'll just indicate to Joe if Lynn does come back, if that's helpful. I'll also message in the Q&A. She said she'd be watching there, although if she's not online, I don't know that she'll be able to sit. But I'll let you know if she comes back.
great, thanks, Joanna. Again, apologies about the scheduling mishap.
So I think that's what we have on the capital improvement program. Like I said up front, I know it's a lot. There's so much that we're thinking about: the condition of the projects, the affordability of our services, having that safety net that and the various programs that Steph talked about for people who are having trouble on their bills. That's something that we want to continue to work on and have some work plan items in later in the year to see about enhancing that and upgrading it. But I know it's a lot for the board, and so like I said, if you have questions that come to you as individual board members, feel free to reach out between now and July, and then you'd be coming back asking for a recommendation.
Thanks, Joe. I guess we can move on to matters from the board and get to people having. One thing I do have is I know it's Lauren's last meeting with us on the board. She's moving across the country in a week. Thank you for being here a week before you move. I just want to thank you for the time on RAB. It was great to get to know you. I know you're only here for just over a year, but really appreciate the time and appreciate everything you've done for the board. So I want to say good luck in the move and thank you for your time.
That was my matters to the board. It's a huge thank you. And then I would definitely say it is so helpful to go and see these facilities. And so if I can leave parting words of wisdom is to get new members out there immediately, just puts everything in context and makes it real. So I would just say that would be a priority I would definitely put in place. But it's been fantastic. And I think for education for the community in some way to know the rigor that goes behind these rates that are being charged and like the reasons that these rates fluctuate to whatever extent they do. And the just true thought that goes into it and the trade-offs between the community and equity and supplying water to the human basic need for water is and so I think we've talked a little bit about how to parlay that messaging, but I would say focus on that, but also probably help with some of these initiatives, but also just for a little bit understanding of what goes into the rate increases. But yeah, it's been fantastic and rewarding, and thank you all. And great group of people, and I've served on many boards, and I really think this is well run and gives everyone their time to give good input. So it's been a fantastic experience, and I'll miss you guys.
Thank you for those parting words. Any other matters from the board? If not, we can move to matters from staff.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I might just pick up on that same thread from a staff perspective. Lauren, really appreciate your time that you've been working with us here for over a year now, and the time that you've put in. I know you wrestled with the decision, and really appreciate you staying through a few extra meetings and asking questions and staying engaged. And really appreciate all the board members and the time that you put in. The amount of material that's in the packets. We try to keep the memos concise, but if you start digging into the attachments and once a month dedicating your time here, it's a lot. So really appreciate that. And I'm amazed that you're here tonight, or if you're moving, but we really wish you and your family the best in the future. And thank you for your willingness to serve on the board.
Good work, guys. It's amazing. It is amazing to see what goes into this.
Yeah. And the other thing that I was going to touch on, I already covered what I was going to say during the CIP presentation. I just wanted to provide an update on Gregory Creek and the community meeting that we had. It went well, but we already covered that. So if you'd like, I could move into the upcoming agenda.
Sounds great.
Assuming I can find it on my screen here. Should be able to memorize it though. So the big thing next month will be probably won't be much of a presentation unless you all bring questions to us offline or one-on-one with staff between now and July. Maybe just a quick recap in July of what we've gone through, and teeing up a motion for you on the CIP for the board to take a vote and recommendation to city council. And then we'll have an information item on water quality updates, just updates on the Eurasian milfoil, got the Boulder Reservoir, invasive species that we've been monitoring closely. We'll talk about the lead service line inventory, kind of a state regulated thing that we're going through. And then an update on the backflow program. So that should have a good agenda for July, and then we'll take the August month off for not seeing a need to meet then. And we'll probably have a brief business meeting in September. very likely meet at one of our other facilities. And the purpose of the business meeting will just quickly have public comment, approve the minutes, and then through the board's feedback at the last retreat, it'll be a great opportunity to go out and see the main sewer project as a tour. So we'll formally close out the meeting and then go and have the tour. And that's what things are looking like for the next three months. That's what we've got.
Cool. Well, thanks again to Joe and Chris and Steph for the presentation tonight, and again, apologies to the public for the agenda timing mishap. And with that, we can adjourn. So is there a movement to adjourn the meeting?
A second.
All in favor? All right. We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.